Bloodshed in the News: Dealing with Graphic Images by Stefan Liedl. Every natural disaster, shooting, terror attack, or war nowadays triggers a flood of horrifying and violent images. Gone are the days when only press photographers captured grief and terror with their lenses. In the digital age, bystanders can also snap shots of severed limbs and burnt corpses with their phones and cameras and upload them directly online. How should media organizations handle such graphic images? When is it justifiable to publish photographs of the injured, the dying, and the dead? Is it sensationalism to splash the bloodied body of Libya's dead dictator, Muammar Gaddafi, across the front page of a newspaper? Is it appropriate to print photos of children killed by bombs in Syria? What about the images of victims, some with shredded limbs, that were published following the Boston Marathon bomb blasts? In her 2003 book looking at representations of atrocity regarding the pain of others, U.S. author Susan Sontag wrote, "Harrowing photographs do not inevitably lose their power to shock, but they are not much help if the task is to understand. Narratives can make us understand. Photographs do something else. They haunt us." To help journalists decide whether to publish certain images, German journalist Simon P. Balzert has composed a code of ethics for the use of graphic images. The guidelines aren't about presenting journalists with a foolproof recipe for dealing with explicit images. It always depends on the context, Balzert said. Sometimes it's important to publish a graphic photograph in order to document the horrors of war. For example, politicians may be interested in propagating the myth that it's a clean war, he said. Before publication, journalists should ensure the photograph isn't being printed solely for its shock or entertainment value, or for purely aesthetic reasons. Rather, the image should be chosen because it conveys pertinent and newsworthy information. Before publication, journalists should see if it is possible to avoid publishing the photograph by conveying the information contained in the image in another manner. Journalists should try to publish those images which are most emotionally appealing and least shocking. Instead of using a photo of a dead child, for example, publishing a picture of a child's clothes covered with blood conveys the same message, but is less upsetting. Journalists should apply the same standards to the use of graphic images of events in other countries as they would to the use of images from their own country. This avoids prejudices about other countries and other cultures. Journalists should avoid general rules such as no photos of corpses. Rather, they should decide which is the most suitable image on a case-by-case basis. Death and public discussion about death are part and parcel of an enlightened society and shouldn't be inhibited by the media. Journalists should justify the use of a graphic image and an accompanying text. The picture caption doesn't usually allow enough space for this. If possible, journalists should use an appropriate place in the publication to warn readers that a photo of a graphic nature follows. Journalists need to be aware that continued publication of graphic images lessens their overall effect. Therefore, they need to ensure that the publication of each explicit image is absolutely necessary. If journalists believe the publication of a graphic image is justified, they shouldn't refrain from publishing the image because of concerns about whether it is appropriate for children or the audience's reaction. Journalists should always consult with other editorial staff if they are in doubt about whether to publish certain images. However, journalists need to remember that they and their colleagues might have less inhibitions about seeing graphic photographs than average members of the public. Journalists should ensure victims are not identifiable, at the very least blurring victims' faces. This especially applies to photos of the dead, out of consideration for the deceased's families and loved ones. Journalists should ensure that the image maintains the dignity of the person depicted. This is especially true if the person is identifiable. Images of an individual who has died by suicide should not be published. Journalists should be prepared to engage in a dialogue with their readers and publish letters to the editor regarding controversial photographs.